welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss Ryanair and Alaska Airlines' second quarter results. Enjoy. Hey, Jay. Happy earnings to you and yours. How's your week going?
Yeah, we're knee deep in the earnings season here.
That's right. This week we've already had, we're recording listeners on Wednesday, July 26th. So we've already had Ryanair, Alaska, Hawaiian, Volaris, and we still have Southwest, IAG, and Air France to come. So it's a busy week.
And don't forget Finnair and EasyJet.
Yes. Those two. They keep coming hot and fast. So,
Yeah.
well, tell us a little bit about Ryanair, Jay. What did they have to say?
Sure. Oh, well, there's so much to say about Ryanair, and we could spend so long. I'll focus on a few highlights. First, I'll start with the headline number here. They had a 19% operating margin, 19.5%, and that as you imagine, that ranks very well. In fact, that's the highest that any airline has reported so far. It's still early in the earnings season, but 19%, very strong quarter. Ryanair did say that short haul close-in bookings, and remember, Ryanair does take quite a bit of short haul business traffic. It's not just a leisure airline, and their short haul bookings for the summer are showing some signs of softening. So there is that. Now, again, this is all coming from very strong levels of demand. So I don't think that it's anything that should, cause any concern or worry. I think it's all around a very good picture. Now, Michael O'Leary, the CEO of Ryanair is, he's someone who will he's a glass half empty type person, and he's always he'll always accentuate the negative in these earnings calls. So
this is true. Sorry, I'm going to jump in or give an aside, Jay. So prior to the last few years, I never covered Ryanair, and that's something I've definitely noticed in O'Leary's comments. He's always sort of raising, well, things could go bad, so this could be tough. He's always raising the negative. Even if the airline, ends up doing quite well, he seems like he's always on the, like you said, glass half empty side of the spectrum.
Right. Oh, fares are just going to be terrible this winter. It's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to never quite that bad, and they always perform fantastically well. I think part of it is that O'Leary is a famously good negotiator. And when he's in a room negotiating contracts with unions or airports, or he doesn't want to say, "Oh, things are going great all the time," because that's not a good stance from which to negotiate. So I think that maybe plays into that a little bit. We want to emphasize how risky things are, and how you gotta give some concessions on the cost side when you're negotiating with me, because things are looking really bad.
Yes.
Probably a little bit of that. I mean, some of it maybe is personality, but there's no bottom line. Is Ryanair is perhaps the most successful airline of all time. You can maybe argue it's Southwest, and they've been in the business longer, but certainly over the past decade or two, Ryanair's margins have been quite a bit higher than Southwest. So just an incredible business model. And one thing I want to emphasize is that within Europe right now, you can count on probably both your hands the number of airlines that are actually larger today than in 2019. And Ryanair is one of them by a lot. So it's like, I mean, you can go through it, like Ryanair, Wizz Air, Aegean, Jet2.com. Don't overlook them. They're growing very fast. Volatea, Transavia, a few others, but Ryanair is about a third bigger than it was in terms of seat capacity.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy to
impressive,
think that.
yeah.
Crazily impressive. So they just, anytime a crisis hits, they always wind up coming out ahead and taking advantage of it. And they did exactly that during COVID. And look, EasyJet is down. I mean, that's they're another low cost carrier that sometimes people compare with Ryanair. They're smaller today than 2019. So Ryanair is just a lot bigger. And they just keep amassing this colossal size, and it really is just massive now. I mean, you're starting to approach like U.S. levels of massivity. Is that a word? But I mean, 400 or 500 aircraft now, with another 400 or 500 in order. I don't quote me on those numbers, but it's just you're starting to get into the scale where you do have just this immense negotiating leverage when you're talking with Boeing or you're talking with an airport, whatever. That's that serves them really, really well. So that's one
Oh
point I
yeah,
wanted to make.
no,
Yeah.
you say like they're approaching those levels, but I'd say they are. I mean, their size is comparable to. I mean, they're only a couple hundred planes smaller than Southwest, but in the European
Yep.
marketplace, they are the largest airline.
They're the
Not
largest
counting
airline in
long
Europe.
haul, but in Europe, they are the
Correct.
largest airline, and by a wide margin.
By a wide margin. I mean, they're the largest airline in Italy, which is their largest market. They're, I believe, the largest airline in Spain, the largest airline in the UK. I mean, yeah, they, as you said, they are the biggest in Europe, and so yeah, they do. I was just in terms. I mean, Southwest is still a bigger airline, so I was only that was my frame of reference when I said they're approaching U.S. levels of immensity, but yeah, that's I mean they're bigger than Alaska and JetBlue and so yeah, huge, huge, huge airline. And the only other thing I'll bring up, I mean, I encourage everyone to listen to, O'Leary's call because there's just so much great stuff in there and so many insights into not only Ryanair business, but where things are going in Europe. But anyway, I'll just call one other point out. They were asked about mergers and acquisitions, and Ryanair is not totally they've done mergers before. They've done takeovers. They're always in small. They took over what was it, Buzz Air, which was like an old
Yeah,
KLM.
didn't they take some of the Lotta Air's assets
Yep,
when they before the pandemic? Yeah,
yep, that was another one. And they formed a new airline joint venture with the governor of Malta. And they do little things here and there, but they basically said those deals, by the way, were a lot of headaches, and so they're not interested in doing anything more, and they certainly don't want to do anything big. Now they do
they're very
expect,
much
and
on the side of the coin where it's like, just compete fiercely until the competitor pulls out and take the market, then buy the competitor. That's
it,
definitely, I'd say, their business plan.
exactly, or let somebody else buy the competitor. We don't want
Right,
to we don't want to
right.
have to digest it ourselves. And that's they've been saying that for a long time. They believe that Europe, and remember, I mean, this is a whole nother discussion, but remember that the U.S. industry has become much more consolidated with 6 or 7 big mergers, since 2005. And Europe, there has been some big mergers, but it's still a very fragmented industry. It's an industry where a lot of ailing airlines have been propped up by foreign money. I mean, if you think everything Virgin Atlantic with Delta's money, and for a long time Alitalia with Etihad money, and Air Berlin with Etihad money. I mean, some of those have disappeared, but TAP Air Portugal is was had money from David Neeleman, and I mean it just goes on and on. So still a very fragmented sector, and O'Leary has been saying for a long time that it's going to continue to consolidate, and that's in fact happening. I mean, we saw what Lufthansa is now investing in Italia's successor ITA, and TAP Air Portugal seems to be on the block. Air France KLM seems to be interested, so we'll probably see more consolidation. The consolidation trend will proceed, and will it ever get to U.S. levels of consolidation? I don't know, maybe not, but that's something O'Leary is certainly something he talks about all the time.
For sure, for sure. Did I don't want to ask, did he talk anything about specific markets, how they're doing, or the push east, or was he mostly broad in his comments?
Yeah, Ryanair is they're usually generally broad. They don't talk about markets a lot in terms of how they're doing individual ones. Now, a couple of points. They did say that Europe in general this summer is one of the reasons why it's very strong, short haul Europe, is that there are so many Americans and even Asians now that are visiting Europe and flying around within the continent. So let's say, someone from New York will get on an American Airlines plane to London. They'll spend a couple of days in London, then they'll get on a Ryanair plane and go visit Italy. That's like very, very, very common this summer. And it's really benefiting Ryanair and probably all the LCCs. So there is that. Now, they are, as you mentioned, as you kind of alluded to, they're pushing further and further east. Some of that is because the planes that they're getting have longer range. Some of it is just because a lot of the Western European markets are becoming more mature. So they're looking at places like Albania is a big growth market. They're going into some Middle Eastern markets now. Now, Wizz Air is doing this to even more of an extreme. I mean, they're based for the
Right.
East anyway, but they're, Saudi Arabian joint venture and things like that. Ryanair's not doing that. They are another big market that they really want to get back into is Ukraine. And they said, as soon
Yes,
as we're
they've
safe, we're
spoken
ready to go.
repeatedly about that.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, that's definitely looking east. Now
Well,
they're periodically asked, are you gonna look west? You're gonna go transatlantic? And they always say no. I think there was a time, maybe a decade ago where they were thinking that it might work, but I don't think they're gonna do it. And if they did, I don't think it would work very well, frankly.
yeah, that's something that O'Leary has been poo-pooing for a few earnings cycles at this point. Well,
Correct.
with that, we're going to hop across the Atlantic and go to the West Coast, talk about Alaska when we come back. And we're back. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about Alaska Airlines results now, and there's some interesting parallels between Alaska and Ryanair. Top line is that airfares on domestic U.S. flights are actually starting to decrease, much like Ryanair mentioned is happening in some European markets. Now, Alaska was very clear about what they're seeing is demand is still robust. It's just that capacity is up in the domestic market. I looked at DO numbers and it was up about 2.5% over 2019 in the second quarter. And at the same time, a lot of Americans, again, going to what Ryanair said, are traveling internationally rather than taking domestic trips because most restrictions have disappeared this summer, whereas last summer, summer 2022, there were still a number of restrictions in place. So, yeah, what did you take from Alaska's results, Jay?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I mean, if you read just the headlines and didn't look at their numbers or didn't listen to their call, you would think, "Oh, wow, things are awful in Alaska," because their stock started tumbling, and Wall Street was starting to write all terrible things about their demand, and it's fun. Well, I'll tell you this for starters. So I said Ryanair earned a 19% margin, and they were, that was fantastic. Well, Alaska did 18%, so they're right there. Fantastic, fantastic quarter. They said their full year results are going to be great, just right on par with 2019. They had a good year in 2019. So things seem to be. So what's going on? And the image I had in mind. Do you remember, Ned, when you were a kid, there was that game Operation where you had to like pick the
I
bone out of the
do. It's
guy's.
funny. When I was in Maine at my friend's camp the other week, they had I was just showing my son that over the weekend, so
Right, right.
I'm familiar with that game.
Totally. And like you have to pick the bone out of the guy's body. And if you hit the edge, you go, you get that big buzzing sound. Well, I kind of
Yep.
felt like, listening to that Alaska call, Wall Street was like, they were just waiting for Alaska to say something negative about domestic demand. And as soon as they did, that big buzzing sound went off. And I think people that alarmed people when they said that, yeah, domestic demand's looking a little bit softer than it was, maybe a little bit softer than we expected. But let's keep things in perspective here. It is true that a lot of Americans are flying international this spring, this summer, and that did perhaps take some of the steam out of domestic demand, some of the steam, but still very, very strong yields. Fares are, historically very strong. So I think it's, and they even said, some of the corporate stuff is coming back on the West Coast. The IT corporate is coming back. That's been weak.
Which is not baked into Alaska's guidance, so all
Right.
potential upside if corporate starts to recover.
Starts to recover. Yep. And then, fuel was way down. There was just a lot of things to like about Alaska's numbers. That was my
No,
impression anyway.
yeah, what struck me, Jay, was there was such heady growth last summer. Like RASM up 20-30% is unheard of. And that kind of
Right.
growth was just unsustainable. Everyone agreed
Exactly.
it was unsustainable. Fares were bound to come down. And the truth is even if you know we were never going to stay there. It was always going to be some easing. Alaska's numbers are still quite good. Their RASM is still above 2019 levels, even if it is coming down. And I get some of the concerns about, the continued elevated capacity growth. They're growing 10% in the third quarter, and they're not getting any CASM X gains. Okay, so that's a mild concern, but their margins are still excellent. They're still producing fantastic financial results, and if RASM keeps falling into 2024, and management at Alaska seems to think it'll level off before that. We've seen it again and again. You can pull in capacity growth. That will happen quickly. The industry will react. But for now, it seems like the reaction in Wall Street was just, or in the stock market was just, way beyond the guidance that Alaska provided.
I think so. I think so. And one thing about capacity too is some of that extra capacity, some of that capacity growth is actually just that they're operating a better airline. I mean, they're not canceling as much as they were last year, which adds to ASMs this year. So that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And even on the CASM side, the unit cost side, they're still not. The industry is still not back to full utilization of their workers, full utilization of their aircraft, but they're just starting to get close. And so that's going to be kind of a tailwind on the unit non-fuel unit cost side too. So, but I go back to the revenue side, and I hear them say premium demand very strong. Seattle apparently is very strong. Some of the transcon stuff they said was pretty good. They said the loyalty plan is going well. They're participating in some of the international strength by they just joined One World, and they're they have an alliance with American. So I hear a lot more good than bad. I did in that call. So that's that was my takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I think investors were eager for a reset in some airline stocks, but we will get more guidance on the U.S. domestic market, of course, as Southwest goes on Thursday, July 27th. That's after we're recording the podcast. They are one of the largest domestic airline with almost no internet, with very little international presence, percentage-wise. Southwest listeners will be keen to email me, I'm sure, about all their international flying. But I mean, they are more than 90% of domestic airlines. So we'll get a much
Yeah,
bigger
it's
picture of the domestic market. Because, of course, Alaska is a West Coast airline. They aren't really a national carrier. They are a West
right,
Coast airline. And
right.
when asked during the call if any geography was particularly weak, they said no. They're seeing it broad based. We don't know. Maybe one is, and they didn't want to talk about it. But they wouldn't go into their view is very much the West Coast. Southwest will give us a national view of what's happening, and I think that's going to be a lot more telling to where the market is.
Yeah, and if I can just, I'll go down this maybe interesting for our listeners just to go very quickly through some of the, we'll just stick to the U.S., I guess, of the airlines that have reported so far. And remember, this is Wednesday. I guess you guys will be hearing this on Friday, but so we don't have Southwest yet. But so we had, Delta and United had a 17% margin, both at 17%. American was at 15, and we said last, I think in our previous podcast, that they're a little bit more exposed to domestic, so maybe not as strong as Delta and United. Still very good though. Alaska, as I mentioned, 18, and then the only other one we have so far is sort of the bad news story. The black sheep here is Hawaiian, -2%. You can read about that on our on our website or Airline Weekly, which comes out every Monday. Read more about them, but that's a little bit of a different story there.
Yeah, no, exactly. It'll be interesting, but for by and large, we agree. Alaska's guide is good, definitely, and I think the return to business travel from West Coast corporates is a significant potential upside for them that really isn't baked into their numbers right now, and it's we don't know where that's going to go. Not saying it's going to fully bounce back in the fourth, by the end of the year. It's at 75% currently, but it's business is coming back, and I hear from my friends in the tech industry that the layoffs are done. Some companies are even saying they laid off too much internally, at
Yeah.
least,
Well, you
and
have this artificial intelligence, investment now, which is that's kind of giving the IT sector another boost, and they're kind of rehiring some people. So I think that's probably helpful. I even saw today that San Francisco's office real estate is actually starting to see some momentum again because of this, artificial intelligence boost. So that should help Alaska.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
now, but
Well,
now here's one more question before we go, Ned. For you, this is a theoretical one. So Alaska, one of the issues they're gonna, they're increasingly coming up against is that they can't really expand too much more in Seattle. And Seattle is their bread and butter. That's where they make their money. It's just the airport doesn't have any room to expand that much anyway. So then you start to think about mergers and acquisitions. Do you think Alaska would have any interest in buying Hawaiian?
I saw your poll on LinkedIn this morning,
Yeah, we do
Jay, and
LinkedIn
I
polls.
have,
If you should,
yeah,
everybody should go on
yeah.
my LinkedIn and answer my poll question.
So in my opinion, and this is personal opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't think Alaska has any appetite for another merger right now, let alone the regulatory environment. So I'd say no, but it is an interesting proposal. They definitely are have similar characteristics in terms of airlines. With Alaska has its unique in-state Alaska operation. Hawaiian is the main airline in the Hawaiian Islands. I see there being some corporate synergies there because they would bring that knowledge that maybe a larger American or Delta really wouldn't have. But I really don't think Alaska has any appetite to buy another airline at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a fair. I think that's
Well, what do
a
you
fair
think, Jay? Do
assessment.
you think it?
Well, yeah, I mean, my opinion is that there's, as you mentioned, there are a lot of hurdles. I mean, I think for one, that Virgin America takeover was a bit hard to digest. That was didn't go as smoothly as they may have hoped. So that's one thing that may dictate against something like that. They'd also have a messy fleet integration. They Hawaiian is generally Airbus and Alaska is generally Boeing, and you start to get into a lot of complexities. But what makes me just bring it up is Alaska does have this long-term growth question that they're going to have to answer. I mean, another alternative is you go out and order wide bodies. There's a lot of risk in that too. Like if you buy Hawaiian, you inherit the wide bodies. But and Hawaiian is a really, really nice market to have. So there's you can see some logic behind it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I absolutely
You
agree
brought in
with
those
you.
wide bodies, suddenly you can build your own international gateway in Seattle, something
Yep.
Alaska doesn't have.
Yep.
But again, I don't think they have the appetite for that. But that's just my personal opinion. There
Yeah,
are probably
and it
people in
may
Seattle that have talked about this. So, yeah.
right, and who knows? I mean, maybe it's not something that ever crossed their mind, but it just it's something to think about, not tomorrow or but maybe down the road. Although now would be an interesting time to buy Hawaiian because they're struggling, and so you don't want to buy them at the top of the market. So
No, absolutely not.
maybe we'll be surprised, but yeah, no, it's just an interesting thought experiment and thought exercise.
For sure, for sure. Well, with that, listeners, we're going to leave it there, and you can think about a potential Alaska Hawaiian merger all you want. If you want to send us your thoughts or comments, please, you can email me at er@skift.com. You can email Jay at js@skift.com. Jay, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Ned. Likewise, and yeah, I echo that Ned's sentiment. Send us your opinions. Go on our LinkedIn page. We're very active on LinkedIn. We've got poll questions and all that fun stuff every day. So follow us, share your opinion, and otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.